Well, let's talk about our last session here. This is our sixth conversation about Adoniram Judson and the beginning of the modern mission movement. And again, we put that in a historical context of 200 years ago. It is most appropriate that we talk about that 2012, 2013, 2014, and on into the future because it happened in 1812, 1813, 1814, and the modern mission movement going. We left Adoniram with his new bride, Emily Chubbuck. They got back to Burma in 1846. Got back to Burma in 1846. And she does the research and listens to the stories about mainly Sarah and starts scribing her biography. By 1850, Adoniram is sick. His body is worn out. He's still got scars from the imprisonment time. But living to be 62 years old in a foreign climate with diseases and bugs and problems we've never heard of, he's wearing down. He goes out into the Indian Ocean, hoping that a seafaring trip, breathing salt air, will give him renewed energy. But sure enough, off the coast of Burma, he dies. And that would be April of 1850. Now the captain of the ship is a little bit worried that I don't want a corpse on this ship that is full of communicable diseases, and decides to do a burial at sea. So the box is built. Judson is put in the box. The box is then filled with sand, and he's buried at sea off the Andaman Islands in the Indian Ocean. So there's no grave that we go to find Adoniram Judson. Yes, there's memorial stones to him, but there's no grave that we go to. And I believe it was his sister that would write, it's most appropriate that he be buried in the ocean, because then the waves of that ocean can wash on every shore of every nation and every tribe and every tongue. So the namesake of this good university and the founding cause of our denomination is buried at sea. It's a hard story. The ship had to go on to England. In England, then, they write a letter back to Emily to say, your husband died. It took her 9 months to ever know that her husband had died. In that time, she had a baby. Let's see, yes, it would be, Emily would have 3 babies, and only one of those would make it to adulthood. So in wrapping up the story of this man's life, 3 wives, 13 children, he would bury 7 of those children. Only 6 of them made it to adulthood. How do you wrap up that kind of story? How do you talk about that kind of story? His last project was the dictionary. So let's talk about the dictionary first. Judson was not eager to take on the task of the dictionary, but the mission board assigned it to him. And when you read his reports, there's little terse comments, okay, I'm working on the dictionary because you told me to, and it's not because I want to. He even protests one time to say, why do you take the preacher away from preaching and make him go work on books? But the board realized that we've got to preserve the language. And if anybody can preserve the language, it'd be Adoniram Judson. So it's still the most commonly used dictionary in Burma. We grew up with the Webster's Dictionary, and every school kid in America understands we've got the Merriam-Webster Dictionary. Every school kid in Burma has the Judson dictionary. It comes out, and this is an old one I found, this is an 1892 one. But then here is yet an older dictionary which has a pocket-sized edition and condensed version. So you can put it in your pocket the next time you're going to Burma and read. But he would be more proud of this contribution. This is the Bible used today, but again, he was translating it from when he got there in 1813 to 1840. We looked at the old 1840 edition, and this is the oldest printed version. This is the newest printed version of the Bible. There was a committee that met in 1960 to revise this edition. Now, for us old people, we remember the 1960s as being all of these new fluffy translations coming out in America, the Living Bible and those kinds of things. Well, they decided to do that in Burma. The committee met for 4 months, went over his work, and disbanded and said, we're not going to change it. It's just perfect the way it is. And so this is still the standard Bible. And so if Judson were wanting us to report on his work, I guess we would have to hold up these two documents, the dictionary in one hand and the Bible in the other hand, and say, we engage the life and teachings of Jesus. We engage the culture without being shy about that, without demeaning and belittling the culture. We will engage the culture, and we will hold high the life and teachings of Jesus Christ. Those two are the most significant things that you might see publicly in the life of the Burman world. The first report, the first major writing about Judson's life, what's that book? It could hurt you. Would be done by Francis Whalen, who was the president of Brown University. He would talk to Emily when Emily came back. Emily would die in 1854, but, well, TB really. And so this is the first volume of his work, the first writing, a biography of Adoniram Judson, though there will be many, many more to come, dozens of more biographies to come of Adoniram Judson. Judson, though, would not necessarily want his life recorded. He was always shy about that kind of thing. He didn't want to be in the limelight. And he would be impressed with his work of the Bible and impressed with the dictionary. But the thing that he would be most impressed with, the thing that he would want us to tell, if we're telling the story today, is that in Burma today, in the most Buddhist of all nations, there's over 2 million baptized Christians. And every one of them have to chase their historical lineage back to Adoniram Judson. That would be what he would be most proud of. You can never tell the Judson story without making sure that his wives are included. The 3 Mrs. Judsons, and there were 3 women of significantly different character and temperament, but all of them the right person at the right time, giving us hope that whatever our character and temperament, God has plans for us. We always have to start with Anne, who was bold and who was an aggressor and who was up front. She was not shy. Second wife would be Sarah. Sarah wanted to be a mom, and that's the time that Judson needed someone to talk to, someone to nurture, someone to be a friend with. He had a working partner in Anne. He had a companion and friend in Sarah. And then lastly, he had an artist, a writer, a person who created whole new worlds with words in Emily. And this is kind of a flowery part of his life where there's poetry and there's rainbows and there's butterflies and that kind of thing. And he marries an artist, and she goes a long way to recording and reporting the life of Adoniram Judson. The thing that Judson used most significantly was the media. And in analyzing the modern mission movement, we need to consider that as always part of the way that we work. The media. We talked significantly about the ordination sketch, which the Boston Globe did, and the Boston Globe would send reporters to Burma to find out what Judson's doing, and then draw pictures and write reports in the Boston Globe. It sold newspapers. A missionary story sold newspapers. Sunday school writers, denominational people started writing the story of Adoniram Judson, and every third grader in Sunday school was reading about Adoniram Judson. It became the career of the brightest and the best and the leadership people all through the 1800s. They went into missions. They went into service overseas. And so he used the media to the maximum. Let's have some reports on the life and work of Adoniram Judson beyond our own sources here. Aung San Suu Kyi is a Nobel Peace Prize laureate who's now in Parliament. She spent many years in house arrest in Burma. She visited the United States in September of 2012. And in September 2012, first time in 40 years, she's back in the United States. First time in 40 years, she delivers her first speech, and right at the beginning of that speech, she talks 6 minutes about Adoniram Judson and the impact of the modern mission movement. And it's significant that we hear her evaluation from a Buddhist perspective, from a national perspective, of what Judson did and what the modern mission movement did in her nation. Let's take a minute and listen to Aung San Suu Kyi's evaluation of what the modern mission movement was all about.
As I said, bilateral relations are a product not just of geopolitics, but of history. It might come as a surprise to some of you that historically, U.S. relations with Burma were seen in the light of education and humanitarian help rather than economics or politics. To begin with, the first American to become well-known in Burma was Judson, who was a missionary. I can never pronounce his first name, Adoniram, I think. It's a very strange name for me to pronounce. He was a missionary who came to Burma in the early 19th century. I have the date somewhere, I can look it up. And he worked very hard to establish a basis for his missionary work in Burma. He gained enough of the confidence of the Burmese court to be able to reach out to some of the princes. He wrote the first Burmese English dictionary, and he was widely respected. He lived in Burma many years and died just off the coast of Maine when he had started out on an ocean voyage. So obviously his fate was linked to Burma in very many ways. One of our first colleges was named after him. Back in the old days, before we had Rangoon University, we had two colleges, University College and Judson College. Judson College was named after the missionary I mentioned, and it was a college founded by missionaries. So missionary work was the way in which Americans first came to Burma, and missionaries engaged in a lot of educational enterprises. it was interesting that in the days of colonialism, there was a distinct difference between the educational system introduced by American missionaries and those introduced by Catholic missionaries. The great majority of Christian institutions in Burma were either Catholic or, Christian educational institutions in Burma were either Catholic or Baptist. The Catholics, of course, had convents and boys' schools run by Catholic priests, while the American Baptist Mission set up a number of schools for girls as well as for boys. The girls' schools were particularly well known. The difference between the educational institutions run by the American missionaries and the Catholic missionaries was that the American missionaries, while of course they proselytized, that was their job after all, they were very keen on preserving the traditional culture and manners of the local people. So that in the ABM, the American Baptist Missionary Schools, the girls wore Burmese costume, whereas in the convents they wore gym tunics. And also they were more inclined to take up Christian names, whereas the great majority of girls who went to ABM schools retained their Burmese names and their Burmese costume. The American missionaries also encouraged the preservation of Burmese manners, so that the products of the ABM schools were considered very proper, very well educated, but also very much aware of Burmese manners of courtesy. My mother went to one of these schools. She went to a very famous ABM school in Rangoon, known as the Kemadine Girls High School, because it was in the Kemadine area of Rangoon. And all her life, she was stamped by her years there. Very proper, very disciplined, very precise, very elegant. And now I myself went to the English Methodist High School for a number of years, which is actually an American Methodist institution, although it is called the English Methodist High School. I learned there a lot of hymns. It is ironic, because my mother, in the days of colonialism, when she went to the ABM girls' school, wore Burmese costume, whereas when I went to the English Methodist girls' school after independence, I had to wear skirts. Very strange. But I also noticed that there was less encouragement of Burmese manners in the English Methodist girls' school than there had been in my mother's school back in the 1930s, I suppose, when she was there. So education was very closely associated with American missionaries.
Okay, I think she could probably tell that story better than I could ever tell it. She talks about schools and the American Baptist schools not denigrating her culture. We let them use their own language. We let them use their own dress. We let them use their own food. Did you notice that? One of the highest marks on American Baptist missions has been the way it has been indigenously run and culturally sensitive. Our missionaries have never gone to make Westerners. They've gone to talk about the gospel of Jesus Christ in whatever culture those people happen to be living. And that culture has been affirmed, that culture has been embraced, that culture has been organized and codified, that culture has become a reality because of the literary and the sensitive skills of our missionaries. Aung San Suu Kyi tells that story better than any of us can. I found an article from 1847 that gives the first analysis of the schools that the American Baptist started. I want to read sections of that little article and see if that might not be helpful to get a true analysis of what the modern mission movement was all about. Okay, help me out.
Too much praise cannot be bestowed on the labors of the American Baptist Mission in the education department. The schools are far superior in every respect to the government schools.
This comes out of the Calcutta Review, 1847, and pages 139 to 145. All right, if you want to check it on your own. Continue with another sentence.
The writer in this review concluded by saying that it is somewhat a reproach to this British countryman to find that in the Adoniram province, by far the best schools were those maintained by the American Baptist Mission.
Okay, we did not make that up out of our public relations office. The Adoniram province is the tail on the kite here, and the very best schools, they are saying 1847, are the American Baptist schools. Go ahead, finish that off.
A body from a nation having no material interest in the country, but nonetheless entirely devoted to the welfare of the people.
Isn't that interesting? We are noted as not having any material interest in that country. We're not there to make money. We're not there to find profits and dividends for our shareholders. I'm proud of that analysis. May that continue. Okay, give me one more sentence.
Our English rulers were indeed conquerors of the Burmans and wrung from these fair and beautiful provinces, but our American teachers were conquerors of ignorance and dispelled the darkness from which the English never strove to rescue us.
All right. Some people freed them from ignorance and darkness, which the British never chose to free us from. So that's an analysis of the modern mission movement. Okay, my personal analysis wrap up with things like this. Again, he used well the media. Remember, second missionary there was a printer. You got me? And he used a denominational press. He used the secular press. Anybody that would print, he would be there. Does that say anything about how we do missions in the future? The media that you students deal with, tweeting and twittering and texting and emailing, does that say something about using the media for the future? Engaging in the culture. How do we engage in the culture without exporting and demanding Western values and Western dress and Western habits, acknowledging that the rest of the world has a validity to it that doesn't have to have a Western gloss overcoming it. The thing that Adoniram Judson would be most pleased with is the fact that these people became followers of Jesus Christ without giving up their Burman identity, their Burman language, and their Burman dress. He had a phrase which was most important, a phrase that he used several times, and you'll find it in letters. It might have actually started with Anne, and he took it from her, that the future is as bright as the promises of God. And 200 years later, after the beginning of the modern mission movement, we've now looked past and looked at the back, looked at that side of it for 6 sessions. And as we look into the future, it's dependent on the promises of God. The future is not based upon how smart we are, how good looking we are. The future is not based upon